Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and turn the notifications on. Also, check out Off the Floor. That's our Discord server link right here in the description. That link allows you to bypass the Apple upcharge. You pay just $2.99 per month. Access to 10 different channels and stage shows. We have stage shows there that will not be available on podcasts. That's when one of us just decides, hey, we're going to talk to the fans for 30 minutes about anything that they want to ask about. Our guy Adele did it today. I believe Matt was on there as well doing some early draft stuff. We'll obviously talk about transactions, the Heat, the league, and much more. So check it out. Link right here in the description. Also, check out Prize Picks. That's our fantasy sponsor. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E. Put down $5. You get $50 to play right away. Legal in the state of Florida, and you can play on any sport that you want. Pair between 2 and 4 players together. It's easy. And again, they give you free money and lots of promos. So check it out. Prize Picks. Use the code. That's F-I-V-E. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne.
Yikes. Five on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing rubber frauds. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all band. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat, we trust.
You sound scared.
It's about have the guts, we're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
Welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick on Five Reasons Sports. I got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. We are going to talk today about Terry Rozier. Now, during this week, we will talk about Jimmy Butler. Of course, had a tremendous performance in Detroit, which was wasted, just as Tyler Hero's brilliant performance was wasted. So you get 40 from Hero in one game. You get Butler's 35. And by the way, according to Basketball Reference, and they did this game score statistic, that was the best game of Jimmy Butler's regular season career with the Miami Heat. In fact, it was the second best game of his career in the regular season. He had one that was better when he was in Chicago. Some game he scored 52. Other than that, that was the best regular season game he's ever played from a statistical standpoint. Let me say that 6 times fast. And the third best game he's ever played with the Heat. The only two better, and I'll let you guys guess which, but it was one game against Milwaukee in the postseason and one game against Boston. Probably can figure out which two of those. Right. One of them, he scored 56 points. Third best game he's ever played in a Miami Heat uniform, and they lost to Detroit in overtime because Tim Hardaway Jr. had 3 of Detroit's 23s back to back in the OT, which turned an 8-point lead into a 1-point deficit. So that's just not a game you can allow to get away. We will talk more Jimmy over the course of the week, but I'm not going to respond to everybody confirming their own reports that are not relevant to the situation. I'll just say that. Like this today, it's just like people say, did you see what this person said? They're going with their story. They're going with their non-story. I'm not saying, again, that there's a non-story in terms of the dispute between the Heat and Jimmy in terms of a contract extension. I'm just saying the fact that Jimmy may want to play somewhere else is not really relevant when the Heat hold the cards right now, and they're not inclined to trade him right now. So we'll talk more about it because I do think there's another option we haven't discussed enough, which I believe, well, I don't say believe, I know the Heat would be willing to try, which is extending Jimmy, but not at the max. Maybe more years, less money per. Something we'll talk about probably tomorrow. Okay, so there are other ways to go with this. That's a tease, isn't it? That is a tease. Okay. All right, but we're going to talk about Terry Rozier. So we feel we need to do this because both Greg and I, as we've acknowledged, liked the trade at the time. As did Alex, by the way, and Brady. So we were all on board with this, as were the majority of people in the Heat front office. I know that there was at least one dissent, okay, but the majority of the Heat front office decided to go ahead with this, and it hasn't worked out. Okay, it just hasn't worked out. I mean, he was brought in to be a starting point guard, and he got hurt last year after he finally found some rhythm. If you remember, he shot really poorly for the first 3 weeks when he came in. Then he found some rhythm. Then he hurt the neck. Then he wasn't available for the playoffs. Then he came back this year declaring himself healthy. Then later he talked about having, was it a foot injury or it's a foot injury or toe injury? Afterwards, he's been removed. He was removed from the starting lineup when he was hurt. He didn't get back into the starting lineup. The starting lineup started to play well together with Highsmith and Robinson in there. And then Terry has moved to the bench. And to be honest, the results have not been better off the bench than they were with him as a starter. So we're going to get into the ramifications of this. The first part of this is, can this be salvaged on the court this season for the Heat? What does Eric Spoelstra do with him other than reducing his minutes, which he's kind of already done? He put him on the bench, he reduced his minutes. Is there any other option here? Okay. And does he need to play him consistently to try to get his value up? The second question is, and this is the one I'm sure Greg will enjoy talking about, do you move him now before the deadline? And what do you have to recoup to feel good about yourself, considering that you gave up Lowry's expiring and a first-round pick? And then the other thing which I want to talk about at the end of this is, does this alter at all the Heat's philosophy about acquiring players? Because typically they have not gone after players who put up big stats on bad teams. That's not been their MO. They've done it very few times. We talk about Ricky Davis all the time because we can't really think of a lot of other names. Antoine Walker was one who was on some good teams in Boston, but a lot of bad teams in Boston. He put up some numbers. He came in. There was a lot of conversation at the time in 2005. Could you get Antoine to conform in any way? And he did enough. It was rocky. People don't remember that during that season, but it was rocky. He and Posey kind of split the starting 3 spot, which for Walker was playing a little bit of a different position because he'd largely been a 4 in a day when positions mostly mattered. But there's not a lot of examples. I mean, Jay Will was a different kind of player that they brought in, but he was on some very good Sacramento teams.
He doesn't.
Rozier was on a 21 win. Right. Rozier was on a 21 win team. And it is relevant because when you start talking about some of these guys, like say a Kyle Kuzma, who's available now, who did win a championship as a third option against the Heat, by the way, in 2020. But he's been on number 1, number 2, 1A, 1B option on an awful Washington team. Does it give you pause bringing in guys who are putting up numbers, but the numbers are ultimately meaningless because they're not leading to winning? So those are the 3 ways we're going to handle this. I want to start this way, Greg, with, can you salvage this on the court for this team this year? And I'm going to go through some of Rozier's numbers since he's gone to the bench, okay? So he came back. It's really interesting because he's almost alternated one decent game and one awful game. He came back. He missed the games against Philadelphia and Dallas, which, by the way, were both wins for the Heat. Okay. He comes back against Milwaukee, and I'm just going to go through again. It's just the easiest way to do this because I can't go through everything that happened in all these games. I'm going to go through the game score statistic. You can also use BPM. There's a lot of other numbers that are used on Basketball Reference, but just gives you an idea if he played well or he didn't, okay? Milwaukee game, his game score was 12.7. That's when he came back. By the way, that's his best one since he's come back, his first game back. So it's not like it's gotten better over time here. And he's played now 10 games off the bench since he came back. Then it was 2.5 against Charlotte. He had a bad game. Okay, we thought maybe he might have a good game. He was playing against his former team. He had an okay game against Toronto, a decent game against Toronto in the loss up there, an awful game against Boston, but then again, so did everybody with the Heat. The Laker game, he was okay. Again, the Lakers didn't play any defense. He was terrible against Phoenix. Game score reflects it, 0.7, no contribution. Against Cleveland, he played reasonably well. Toronto, he didn't play particularly well in a win. And then in this game in Detroit, the game score reflects he played well, but if you watched it, because this is the one freshest in my mind, it was he and Jaquez both got you some points off the bench, but not consistent play-to-play, possession-to-possession, production or reliability. And Brady harped on that a lot in the post-game show yesterday. The 2 guys you're counting on to really energize your bench, Jaquez and Rozier, were kind of unplayable late, but Spo had to play Rozier because he didn't want to play Highsmith there, and he didn't have Drew Smith available. And we are at the point, Greg, and I'll let you go here. We are at the point now where losing Drew Smith to foul trouble at the end of the game, this is a 2-way. He may not be a 2-way much longer. Losing Drew Smith in foul trouble at the end of the game is so detrimental. It is a killer because Terry Rozier can't pick up the slack. That's where we're at. So what do you do about this now?
What universe are we in that you just said that out loud? why how we got here is crazy. I'll just say this about this entire Terry Rozier situation. I feel like you're going to see more of him. Get used to him playing. I don't think that they're going to completely put him on the shelf because he's wrestling with, he's not playmaking enough if he's not scoring, and he's not efficient enough when he's scoring to really string together a lot of good games off the bench. He's adjusting to that role. It's not an easy thing, but he's also 18% of the salary cap almost. So like you can't just shelf him. So I think that he's going to get consistent minutes, but it's Drew Smith is definitely a player I think Spo is going to lean on more, but this is not a scenario where I think you're going to see him get DMPs, coaches' decisions. Like I just don't. I think that you're going to see them try to hope for the games when he's hot that he can interject enough scoring and things like that. And the playmaking in Charlotte, I guess, especially the last year, and maybe they should have known that it was just him having an outlier of a season, but like to go from almost 7 assists a game to what he's doing now these days, it's a completely different player. I think maybe the efficiency too is a little difficult now in retrospect, but you got to just hope that he finds a role off the bench because you can't just put him on the shelf. It's similar to Duncan. Like he's another guy that in my opinion has to play just because they're making in excess of $20 million almost in both cases. So you can't just put that on the shelf. I know that that's looking at it kind of in a vacuum financially, but I just look at like you can't have that much sunk money not contributing.
Well, you can, especially if you're looking to move somebody and you only have so many contracts that you could potentially move. Now, I don't think, and we'll get to this in part 2 of this podcast, I don't think there's any way they can recoup a first here. It's pretty obvious. The question is, can you recoup a second? I mean, that with Thomas Bryant, they essentially recouped, and again, they didn't spend a first round pick on Thomas Bryant. He opted out, he resigned, but they got a swap out of it. I mean, I don't know that you could get much better than a second round swap for Terry Rozier the way he's playing right now, which is crazy to say that. But I'll go through some of the numbers here. And again, the contract plays into it. It's 24 million roughly this year, 24 million next year, but or 22 something this year, and then it's going to end up being 22.3 next year because he's likely not going to earn that 1.7 incentive that comes from playing 70 games. He's already missed some time. And making the second round of the playoffs. He has to do both, okay, to earn the rest of that money. In which case, if he does, they'll gladly pay it. The Heat would gladly pay it if those things happened. And they were in they got to the second round, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. I'm going to go through his starter versus reserve numbers because there's enough of a sample size now. 12 games as a starter, 31.8 minutes, 12.9 points, 4.2 rebounds, 3.7 assists. Usage rate of about 20. Defensive rating was atrocious, but again, I'm not going to pin that all on him because the starting lineup really struggled as collectively to begin the year. As a reserve, he's played 10 games now, so 10 as opposed to 12. 25 minutes basically, 10 points, almost 4 rebounds, 2 assists. His percentages are up on the bench. He's gone from 38% to 43%. Mostly because he shot better from 3, 33% up to 38%. Free throw percentage, he's shooting 93% from the line. Somebody at least shooting well from the line. He's made 14 of 15. I mean, on the surface, if you were to just show those numbers to somebody, be like, okay, I mean, you're getting 10 points off the bench, shooting 38% from 3. I mean, that's the type of thing you pitch to another team. But again, this is a guy who's taking up, as we said, a sizable chunk of their money.
And he gave up a pick that you like. To give up a first round pick means that player needs to come in and be a starter, in my opinion, like a unquestioned, like at the beginning of the season, Ethan, I believe that that it was said to you, like, or maybe not directly to you, the big 4 that this team had.
No, it wasn't that they said the big 4. Well, yes. Spo used that big 4 term with Lowry last year, I think, because he was trying to play to Kyle's ego. But I mean, this year it wasn't so much they said the big 4. It was just Spo came out very early in training camp and said, these 4 guys are gonna start. It was a question of like we went into camp thinking, okay,
That's what it was.
core
I'm
four,
sorry.
core four, right? But it was because I had heard before that they had basically 2 guys locked in the spots, Bam and Jimmy. They're gonna sort the rest out. And we also heard, from Riley last year at the end of the year, well, maybe Terry could come off the bench, right? Like when he was asked if Tyler was a starter. They leaned into the Tyler Terry backcourt. Like they didn't separate the 2 of them at first. It was okay, we got Bam and Jimmy, Tyler and Terry are backcourt. And then the question was who's going to be the 5th? And really at the time, it seemed like, okay, you play Jovic because he fits the mold of what you want next to Bam. We talked about how that might be problematic because then you had essentially 3 below average. Jovic at best is average. He made a lot of improvements the previous year. You only have 2 plus defenders in the starting lineup that you might need to go to Highsmith eventually, which is what they did, but they also did it by taking Rozier out and putting Duncan in. I think they expected better. I do. Now, I mean, all indications were Terry had a good offseason. He told me in Bahamas he had a good offseason. And, we were not talking about like Tyler being at this level. And if you're not watching on YouTube, my hand is as high as it goes. I'm only 5'8". And Terry being down here, but that's what's happened. And I almost feel like Tyler's ascension, and he didn't have a good game last night. We have to acknowledge that, even with, the big 3 that he made late in regulation. It was not an efficient. It was only Tyler's 5th game of the year that he shot under 40% with at least 10 attempts. So
he's allowed to have one every once in a while.
Well, Maxey has 9 and he's played a bunch of fewer games than Hero. So yes, he's allowed to have some. Okay. But he didn't play well last night. But overall, obviously, Tyler has way exceeded expectations and Terry has not hit them. And I almost think that weighs on Terry now too. Like they were kind of put in the same grouping, like, in terms of the production that they might provide. And it's been nowhere close. And as a player, you have to lose confidence, I would think, if you're dealing with that circumstance. So I think a lot of this was them trying to get his confidence back. Like it does look, and people watch him and be like, well, he's a confident player. I mean, look at how much he dribbles. Look at the off-balance shots he takes. But he doesn't seem like he's in rhythm doing some of the other things that he did in Charlotte. And I think some of that is what you were talking about, which is in Charlotte, there was no. It's not just that there was no expectations, there were no consequences. Like you're going to get 7 assists just being on the court. And I guess I got fooled by the fact that his shooting efficiency numbers were pretty good, but it seems like that was largely dictated by the fact that he would have these runs where he doesn't shoot well for like 2 weeks and then he's on fire for a little while and it gets his numbers back up. Yes, but he had some games. Didn't he have like an 8 or 9 or 10 3-point game? Like he'll have these games that will skew his averages. And I think what the Heat just want now is they just want they want to know what they're going to get, right? Yeah. Rather than have these explosions, because I don't even think this team reacts well when one of its players explodes like that. They don't win those games. Like they didn't win it last night when Jimmy did. They didn't win it when Hero does it. It's like everybody else stands around and then nobody else is competent the entire night. Like they don't play off each other's high-end games very well. And I just think there's too much variability with Rozier. Like, what you're going to get every night. You're going to get a lot of dribbling and you get some off-balance shots. Is he going to make them? If he makes them, the game score is going to look better. If he doesn't, he looks unplayable. And I just think they're in a weird spot here because I don't think they're playing him to justify the trade. Okay? I don't think they're doing. I mean, Spo's already playing Drew Smith ahead of him. That's a 2-way.
Yeah.
I don't think. And last night when Highsmith went out early in the game, Drew Smith was the first sub in. And the second half, Duncan was the first guy out. Drew Smith was the first guy in. He is the 6th man right now. Drew Smith is the 6th man on this team right now. And Spo is telling you with minutes. So I don't think that Spo is being told you have to play Terry. I would be very surprised by that. But there is a certain point to this that if you're going to try to move him, like he has to look like a semi-functional player that another team would want, even if you're trying to recoup a second. And I think for that reason, and also the lack of players on this roster other than Jimmy who can really break their man down off the dribble and win in isolation, that Terry's going to get those opportunities, but he's also going to sink them in a lot of these games where he's not scoring well or not doing and the other things. And he just doesn't look right now. He seems like a nice guy. I know he wants to be here. I was in favor of the trade. He just still, even off the bench, doesn't look like a fit. Like we're saying, okay, be a Lou Williams type player, but I remember Lou Williams, Jamal Crawford. Their bad games didn't. At least I didn't watch it night to night. Okay, but their bad games didn't sort of stick out the way that
No, and
Terry's
their
have
highs
performed.
were higher. Like we have to acknowledge
Right.
that part of this. But they can't. They frankly like this team needs Terry Rozier to play an intricate role. Like they. It's not like they have all this scoring. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like their offense, I guess, is in the top 10. I don't know if it still is after the Detroit game. So we can say that it's been competent. I know that there's some out there that have poked holes in some of that. And it still is early, but not
Mhm.
too early. I just think that they need what Terry provides just from a scoring output perspective, particularly with Jaime not being necessarily as much of a leap as maybe they expected from him. Like
Mhm.
where are you getting it on the bench? So this is a situation where they have to just keep trying to keep him afloat, as confident as possible, and hope that he finds some sort of role. Or you have to decide, do you look for a player who's on an equal deal for equal amount of years so nobody goes into a worse financial situation, but maybe he's a better fit? And that would end up being like less of a stat stuffer on a bad team and maybe a glue guy from a better, situation.
Well, and that's one option. The other option we'll get to after the break is convincing a team to take the last year of Terry's contract at whatever it's going to be, 22 and change, um, and maybe sweetening it with a pick. But they only have we did a whole podcast on this the other night. They got two second round picks through 2031. So
Can't
I
do
don't
it.
really know how I don't really know how you sweeten it. One other number on Terry, and then we'll get to the other side here. He's scoring virtually the same. He's played in 11 wins and 11 losses. Okay, he's scoring virtually the same. His other numbers across the board are about the same, but he does shoot 43% in wins and 37% losses. Now that may apply to some other Heat players, but that jumped out to me a little bit. Like when he scores, they have a better chance. And you're right, they need his skill set. And Jaquez, who deserves a pot of his own right now, because I don't really think he's playable right now either. I'm not saying he won't be in the future, but they don't have a lot of places to go. Like even if Josh is healthy, we didn't see much there early in the year. Doesn't seem like Spoelstra wants to play Burks. Like Drew Smith has jumped out in large part for his own work ethic, doing winning things. But when Spo has to say that, like when you see a guy who plays does winning things on both sides of the floor time after time, it's also because he's not seeing that from everybody else. Okay. And
Mhm.
so I give credit to Drew for stepping into this void. Enormous credit, deserves the standard. But it's also because some of these other guys, I mean, Burks, you can say maybe hasn't had enough of an opportunity. And then, but the other thing is, okay, is Larson going to get an extended look when he's healthy now? Because you're not getting it from Rozier, you're not getting it from Jaquez, and Larson's one of those guys who you just don't see a lot of mistakes. Like he's another guy who seems to do the right things always. All right, we'll get into the trade ramifications of some of this in a second. Before we do, I want to mention a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, our friends over at Water Cleanup. You can find them at WCUFL.com. That's WCUFL.com. This is where you go if you've got any kind of a leak, okay? Get it taken care of right away. You should sign up for their preventative maintenance program. They do the leak detection. This is your one-stop water and mold cleanup shop based in Boca Raton. Michael and Robert and his team, they service the entire Tri-County area. They actually service Central Florida, West Florida as well. They've helped out after hurricanes and other disasters there. So check it out. It's WCUFL.com. Water cleanup of Florida. If you've got the schmutz,
They got the guts.
do you think there's any chance that the Heat would be able to move the last 2 years of Rozier's contract and say take an expiring? Like, I'll give you two names, okay? We've talked about on our threads, all right? One is Malcolm Brogdon, who's in Washington right now, right? I believe. I lose
Yeah.
track. He was in Portland. He was picked up as part of the Joe Cronin
You're
master
not
class.
alone. Everyone's lost
Okay.
track of where he is, but
From
from wherever he is, I'm with you. I
Okay.
think it's
And
Washington though.
theoretically, he would be a good if he was healthy and like what he showed as a rookie, um, in Milwaukee and all that. Like he is a type of player that would make sense for the Heat. He's kind of an on-ball, off-ball type player. Wasn't he a 4-year college player? Like he fits a lot of their qualifications. Okay, but he hasn't been healthy in a long time. Like totally healthy, and he's gone through a lot of stuff since. He's not the same player. And the same is true of Lonzo Ball in Chicago, who I know that Riley liked when he came out of the draft. Now, Lonzo has had injury issues. Lonzo became a very good three-point shooter, which was not expected. Remember, he had all the issues with the shot. He was very much in the spotlight at that point when he was with the Lakers. He, Randall, Kuzma, these were Ingram. These were the guys that kind of were dumped, okay, and during the LeBron sort of, reload out there. I like Lonzo as a player a lot. Theoretically, if he's healthy, the Bulls looks like they're looking to move him. He's on the last year of his deal. The contract would fit, right? Because it's 20. I think Lonzo's making 20.
No, they would fit. The issue here, Ethan, is the draft pick situation. The Heat aren't giving up any future picks. I don't see it happening. One, their picks are locked to a degree, but also I don't see them philosophically pumping another future first round pick into this build. I don't see it happening.
Well, I'm not saying a first, though. I'm not saying a first. Like, what would it? I mean, again, there's two sides to every story here, and that's why this whole thing with Jimmy is ridiculous in my view, because nobody's considering the Heat's perspective on it, which is the Heat don't want to trade him right now. And so I don't want to do the same thing and say, well, if you threw Chicago this, like Chicago has to be motivated to want Terry Rozier. I don't think they would in the current state of their build. They got small guards too. They got Io. They've got Kobe White, right? Like they don't. You'd almost have to move Rozier, I would think, to a third team.
Yeah,
probably. So I don't know what kind of draft compensation would be needed, and I don't know if I guess you would just be getting Lonzo or Malcolm as a rental, essentially, with not intention to re-sign. You're
sooner. And that usually costs something. That's the thing. But I mean, you could also ask the question, would it be worth, if you are going to take a shot on a Lonzo Ball type of player, like if it's not a first round pick, would you part with one of the young guys that you have on your bench currently and try to get that done? Like that's another way of looking at it. I don't think the Heat will look at it that way. I think that they're more likely to maybe look for a glue guy that just makes less money overall, but goes for the same amount of years, maybe not a lot less money, but just slightly less, start to get further and further from that apron. I think that but we'd obviously, that's another podcast to go through all of the names that would fit that list. And it would be tons of guys throughout the league that are maybe in situations just like Terry, where it's not working to the optimum level that they expected, but there's multiple years left on a deal. I don't see the move. I mean, you're mentioning a couple guys. I think that it's we would be hope trafficking to a large degree to think that the Heat are going to get either of those things done.
Well, I was looking at, and I just lost it here, but I was looking at Chicago's cap sheet here. Lonzo, what is it, about 21 million? But again, like, what are they looking for? They seems like they're finally deciding that they're going to clear some of these contracts and build younger, because I mean they've been trying to move Vucevic, right? They've been trying, they didn't re-sign DeRozan. They've been trying to move Levine with no they haven't been able to do that. I mean, Ball makes 21.4 this year. He's got $1 million in unlikely to be earned incentives. Okay. And you look at the Bulls books next year, what they have on the books is they've got Levine. Again, they're trying to move at $46 million. Vucevic, and people tell me Tyler's not on a good deal. They got Vucevic at 21.4, Patrick Williams at 18, Kobe White at 12.8 in last year of his deal. Io. There are extensions possibly that can be offered in some of these cases, but they're trying to clear space. They don't want Terry Rozier. Like I would be very surprised. I mean, again, it's what's the kind of team that would want Terry Rozier, and it would seem to be a team kind of in the Heat's position that needed a scoring guard off the bench. And that's why I think this podcast matters, because he's got to prove he can help a team in that role, right? And so far with the Heat, he hasn't.
They need him for that role. That's like that's this whole issue. They can't go around looking for another guy and offering him as that solution when he's not that solution for them. And they basically, I really think that they just have to wait and hope that he finds his role. I don't see them being aggressive in trying to necessarily shed him from the team. Like in a quick move, it would be definitely something where they're going to take their time and hope that, like, think about how much different we look at Tyler Hero in the same time it's taken for Terry to completely regress in the opposite direction. And you just have to hope, well, maybe in the next 25 games, Terry can have an incline. And, it's not unprecedented to see it go in the other direction. We just watched it. And you hope that you get to somewhere around net neutral, and then maybe you can make a move closer to the deadline.
I guess the difference between Terry and Tyler was I think Terry is what he is at this stage. The question is, can you maximize what he currently is? But you're talking about a player who's 30. Tyler was 24. I think we failed to give him enough credit for the work he was putting in. We talked a lot about the work, but not the very dedicated, very specific work that Tyler put in to improve certain aspects of his game, including some of those that people thought he could not improve. But again, it's different at 24 than 30. Now, Terry told me, and when I did a short podcast with him, and I probably should re-promote that because it kind of got lost that day, but I did a short one with him in the Bahamas, and he said he thinks he could be an effective player until his late 30s, that he wants to play a long time. Well, I mean, if that's the case, maybe he does need to adjust his game somewhat, but I don't know what. Like, that's what I'm saying, because the finishing with him has always been subpar for a point guard. The defense, he's just doesn't have the tools to be a great defender. He was essentially a volume scorer on rhythm. That's what he was in Charlotte. And it's just with this team, it's just very hard to see that fitting, I guess. You're going to have a little pocket of the game that Terry's just going to do the step back thing and pass the open three to take a fall away too, right? I mean, sometimes it's going to work. It's going to work, but I don't know. And that's why I think maybe it leads to the last part of this, which is that I think that the Heat will probably refrain from some of these guys who are putting up big numbers on teams without consequences. I just think it's tough to go that direction. I know it's what was available last year. We talked about DeJounte Murray, who I think is a better fit for Miami, but he would have cost more. As it turned out, he did end up costing more. But I think when we look at some of these teams that are dumping now, like Washington dumping, we mentioned Brogdon. He's been a winning type player before, though. But Kuzma, whose name was mentioned today, he was the third option. He is, but he was the third option on championship team in LA, but the first two options were closer to prime LeBron and AD shooting at a level he'd never shot before. So I don't know how much credit, and you could argue KCP might have been. The Heat were hurt. Well, I agree with those in the Heat organization and believe the Heat win that championship if Bam and Dragic are healthy, but they didn't, so it didn't happen. But you could argue, too, that KCP was more important to those Lakers with his defense than Kuzma. But anyway, he contributed on a team that won a championship. I'm not going to disparage a bubble championship because I wouldn't have done it if the Heat had won it. But he's gotten better in a losing situation over the past couple of years. But then the question is, has he really gotten better? We don't know. You're not playing those kind of games. And I think when you start to look at players from, say, a Utah, right, which has now been losing now for multiple years.
Portland.
Portland. Yeah, I wouldn't take anybody from them, right? I mean, Jeremy Grant, but not at that number. You look at Scoot's working out, right? Really working out, Cronin. Right? And then you look at some of the teams in the East, again, the Charlotte situation, Detroit situation. I shouldn't speak because I guess the Pistons are now, they've beaten the Heat twice to this year, but obviously that's been a losing situation for a little while. Some of these teams, I don't know.
Don't go get Tim Hardaway Jr. Don't do that.
No. Although I was happy for Tim Jr. last night because that's a moment against the Heat he'll always remember, to have his dad there too and everything. Yeah. But yeah, I wouldn't do that. But I think that the Heat have stayed away from that type of player for a reason. And I just think last year it was, okay, this is someone we can get to kind of help Jimmy get over the finish line. Of course, Jimmy didn't get to the finish line, and then Terry didn't get to the finish line, and it didn't work out. And my hope is, and I believe this actually from those I've talked to, I hope that what they gave up for him won't have a major effect on how they handle it now. It is somewhat about getting an asset if that's where this ends up going, but they're not going to recoup that asset, right?
No.
So there's no reason to force it to recoup a first. Nobody's giving them a first-round pick for Terry Rozier now. This is not with the way he's playing. I mean, just in a vacuum or whatever. And I just hope that Terry
compound
can
it by
get it going.
giving up one with him to go get another player, please.
No. Well, then we'll be doing another of those podcasts about where all the picks went. So no, it's we don't want to be doing that. All right, we'll get into more Jimmy stuff tomorrow. I'm sure that somebody will be confirming their report that Jimmy wants to play. What is it? He's going to want to play with Neymar. Where does Jimmy want to go next? I can just tell you it is the same as it ever was. The Miami Heat are intending to take this thing until the end of the season, and opt out is his choice at that point. And then if he opts out, it may be to his benefit to work with the Heat. But we will discuss this other option, which I want to throw out there, which is kind of a compromise, but Jimmy would have to swallow a little pride to do it. But I do know that the Heat would like Jimmy Butler to finish his career with them. And that is the one part of this, and I'll probably lead the next part of the next episode of this. That's the one part of this that like nobody's talking about. Like they're not pushing him out the door. They just want to do this at what they believe to be some kind of value, and so that it allows them to do some other things in the future. And we can argue whether that's the right way to go about it or not, but it's not as simple as Jimmy wants to go to this place. I want to go get a Starbucks. I just walk to that's not how this thing works. Okay. Starbucks may not be open. All right, Greg, we appreciate you. Thank you to our sponsors, Prize Picks. Use the code 5FIVE. Subscribe to Off the Floor Water Cleanup of Florida, WCUFL.com.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.